I want to start with, you've said that this film is, you've made films about love before.
Yes.
But this film is a more optimistic view on love. So explain that. Well, why? Why is it more optimistic?
Well, it's a film that I'm making, and as a personal filmmaker at a time where I actually believe that love has the potential to blossom with time, and that was something that I didn't experience previously. So I think it's a really romantic film about two people who've lived together for 40 years and still like each other, which is in itself a feat. It's also a film about love at different perspectives in our lives. So it focuses on the central relationship, but we also have Marissa Tomei and Darren Burroughs, who are a couple in the middle of their lives in their 40s, questioning what they have. And then you have this kid, played by Charlie Tahan, who's really discovering love in different forms for the first time. And so to me, it's also a film about the cycles of our lives. And if you can speak about that in a non-cliched way, then you're maybe saying something that people can relate to.
Absolutely.
My films are always more articulate than I am, in a certain way. I mean, they speak with more subtlety than one does when you try to then describe. I mean, it's the same kind of thing that, for example, I never talk to an actor about subtext. It's never something I want to be articulated, because as soon as you do, it becomes literal. And I think you want to create films in which things are more amorphous than that.
Do you think, that's interesting, do you think that you can express yourself more honestly through film than speaking?
I think I'm more complex. I also have a better sense of humor in my films than I do in this environment when you're trying to be rigorously articulate in a certain way. I think that my films are the deepest expression in some ways. Maybe my relationships also, but my films are very much who I am. It's wonderful. I have friends who are novelists, for example, and you are suddenly given the opportunity to know who they are through their work, and in a way that even if you've known them for decades, they reveal something else in the movie or the work, the novel.
It's fantastic. I mean, it's stuff. You know, you're talking about stuff that you perhaps wouldn't get brought up in chit chat with your friends.
Yes,
you're going deep.
You're also, I think, films, art in general, but what you're doing is you're trying to put in some solid form what you're attentive to. What are you observing? And that's true in paintings as well. That's something you see. What I love about John Lithgow's character, Ben, in this film, is that he's a man who is as serious and as risk-taking in his work at 70 as he probably was at 20. And for me, this character was partially inspired by a man named Ted Rust, who was a sculptor that I was very close to in Memphis, Tennessee, who died at the age of 99. At 98, he began his last sculpture, which was of a young teenager with a backpack on. And he also, at 95, he started to reread Shakespeare. And, you know, I find that that's the kind of life I hope for. And it's a kind of life that John Lithgow, as a person, not only as a character, is really living.
Yeah, I could tell he could feel himself in that role. I particularly enjoyed Mr. Lithgow's physical performance in this film.
Right.
I think it's actually very powerful, the way he walks and moves in his mannerisms. Do you remember ever talking to him about those?
Yeah, I think there were definitely choices he made. He was playing a character maybe 5 to 7 years older than he is. And so he wanted to speak to that fragility, which would also become important in the story, without overplaying it. So it was a process of finding just a few things that could physically give that sense to an audience. What we wanted always to do, and this was something that John and I talked about when we first met, was to keep the film in a register that was very naturalistic and everyday. And I think that's not what he was asked to do on Third Rock, for example. And I think this was something new for him, which was this really almost like a 1970s kind of performance, in the sense that he's all there, he's in a character, but also you see him coming through.
Right. I think one of the unique things about this film, as a romance picture, which it can be viewed many ways,
yes,
it's a romance picture. What I really like is that like you said, like you referred to earlier, they're never in combat with each other.
Yes.
The obstacles are not within their relationship.
Right.
It's truly purely romantic in that way.
Yes.
The obstacles are external.
Yes.
Were you going for that?
Well, I think we wanted to make a romance and a love story. I think of it as actually, there's a whole genre of the remarriage comedies of the 1930s. Films like His Girl Friday and Happened One Night, Palm Beach Story, where characters were married for various reasons of temperament or external reasons. They were separated, and then the film's job is to bring them back together. And it's a very romantic, it's the Shakespearean comedy. It's actually built usually on that same thing. And so we wanted to do that. We didn't know how to separate them until we read about this case in the Midwest where a man had been fired from his job for marrying his partner, and he was a choir director for a Catholic church, and that seemed like a great kind of inciting incident for our plot. And there's a plot in this film.
Yeah. Before we started shooting, I was telling you about Chopin and how I grew up playing Chopin because my parents forced me to play piano.
Right.
That's what I felt through the movie. It reminded me of my childhood. What do you feel when you hear Chopin?
Fascination. I think it's something that when you listen to it, and there is a soundtrack of the film that's coming out, and that's exciting because I think people will want to re-listen to this music. It's so much more complex than you can ever imagine, and it's also so varied. And I think for us, it felt like it was really the perfect film score. We had been influenced to some extent by Woody Allen's use of Gershwin in Manhattan, and we wanted to make a romantic film about New York City, and Chopin became part of that romance.
There's something about piano that kind of reminds you of what New York used to be, right?
You know, I think I think that's true, but it's also about that generation in general, not just New York, who had an attachment to different things than our generation does. And there's something that I feel like we're going to miss when that generation, which is the generation of my parents, when that generation goes.
Speaking of the generational dynamics in this movie, it's one of the main themes of these three tiers of Alfred and John, and then Marissa and
Darren,
and then Charlie.
Yes.
Boy, which is talk about making those dynamics unique, because there's all the way down. They're totally different issues there.
Well, we're each different people in different chapters of our lives, and I also really think I wanted to make a film about what we teach each other and what we learn from each other in close proximity. When I was working on the script with Mauricio Zacharias, my co-writer, I had just gone from living in my apartment in New York alone to living with my husband, our two kids, the kids' mother, and visiting parents who were coming to help us. And so it went from a very private space to a very communal space, and there was a lot of material there. There was both beautiful and comic and generational that I could see, that I wanted to be a part of the film.
Had you ever felt that generational kind of distance, I guess, before that living situation?
I think in all our lives we feel it. I think maybe I'm more aware of it now in the middle of my life. I'm really aware, and I'm also a new parent, and I think you begin to know that you are not the only protagonist anymore. And I think having that awareness that there's other stories going on has always been a part of what filmmaking is about, is to try to be attentive to those other stories. There's a scene in the film where you see all the faces of the audience in the film, which was actually John Lithgow, when we were shooting this one concert scene, told me about Bergman's The Magic Flute, which I had never seen, where he shoots audience members. And I thought it really spoke to kind of the title of the film, the strangeness of love for each of us, and how unique we all are. And I like getting to the democracy of our lives through these kind of images.
You utilize long shots.
Uh-huh.
a lot in the film. Well, maybe not a lot, but very key moments.
Yes.
What's the beauty of a long shot? I think, I love long shots like that, where you can just kind of soak it in.
Well, I think what I hope in this film is that the shots are not about their duration, but they're about what they allow the audience to feel. I don't think this is a pretty easy film for audiences to watch, and that's nice. And my other films have not all been that, and I love those films. But it's nice to make one that's easy to watch and easy to enjoy. I think it's sort of like psychoanalysis or something. Without being too academic, I like to draw the audience's attention to people in moments where they might not expect to be watched. And I think that's the privilege that cinema gives. It can capture the privacy. And sometimes I love movies where I think I shouldn't be here. It's too close.
Mm.
And sometimes that's what this film tries for.
And you said, I think in another interview, you said use a 50 millimeter lens
Right.
for almost the entire movie.
Yes. Well, we never got up to. We used mostly lenses that are very what I think of as human lenses that are close to the human eye. Bresson, for example, only used the 50. Ozu, I think, primarily used the 35. These are not. They're non-alienated lenses. The characters might be going through troubles, but the audience is very close to them. And that was something new for me, and it really came out of my work with Christos Fouteris, who's the cinematographer, and we talked about what we wanted to achieve, and the lens was really important to that.
Charlie's character is a good kid.
He's a good kid.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I think that's one of the most fascinating parts of the generational dynamics there. Is that
right.
Dad obviously does not see him as a good kid, or there's something aggravating him there.
Right.
And talk about that. Charlie's father in him.
Well, Charlie plays Charlie Tahan, who's this extraordinary young actor who gives a very raw, authentic performance as a teenager, a good teenager. At some point, he does something. He makes a slight indiscretion. He steals something that he shouldn't steal. But we always wanted it to be a minor.
It's almost comical how innocent it is what he steals.
Yeah, I mean, we won't give it away.
Right.
But it's not a big deal. But I think having teenagers in your home is like having it's no easier than having your great uncle in your home. Mm. They're alien beings, and yet they're all living on the same planet. And I think I wanted to speak to those difficulties that we have in connecting to other generations. It's not like we all just embrace our grandparents and embrace our parents. We're actually in struggle with each other. And that, again, is kind of the strangeness of familial love, is this extraordinary intimacy, and yet these places of gaps between us. And it's also really good, it's drama.
There's a great line that John Lithgow has where he says, when you're living with someone, you get to know more about them than you care to.
Yes.
It's so hilarious. It's so true. I mean, it speaks to that. It's
yes.
Great.
You're the second reporter to mention that line, and I've suddenly thought, that's a good tagline for this film. I mean,
it is.
Right?
I think it would be.
Right.
Yeah. And, speaking of that, staying on that subject, the shot that I thought was really, really effective was when John Lithgow is staying with them, and he opens the door into Charlie's room, and he gets kicked out of there, and he looks over and he sees the older couple, and
right.
he's stuck in between these generations.
Yes.
And he's just standing there like this, and it's great.
Yeah.
It's the way he's standing.
We spent a lot of time on that little sequence to get that right, and I think we really are talking about a couple who are losing their place in this world and who are being squeezed out. And I think that's something a lot of people relate to. And I think it's something the elderly can relate to. It's also something that economically many of us can relate to in cities. I mean, certainly in San Francisco, this idea of whose city is it? And those are really complicated questions about culture, and that I hope in very simple ways our film also addresses.
Alfred and John are just wonderful together.
Yeah, they're wonderful separately too. They're
And-
wonderful people.
Yeah, and I bet they're wonderful off camera.
Yeah. Well, I think they had they knew each other they knew each other socially for probably 20 years, but not well. They both have very similar lives in certain ways. They live in their adult lives in Los Angeles. They each have been married for 30 years. They are thespians in a kind of classic, old-fashioned sense, theater and film and all these different things. And what happened on set was they kind of fell in love, as friends can do in certain times. An opportunity at late in your life to become really close to someone new is a wonderful thing to watch. And that happened on set. And you would always see them, every picture of them, they're like huddled with each other, telling stories and laughing. And there was a joy between them that I think is in the film. I think you really feel that as an audience member.
Absolutely. It's a very warm, they're warm moments.
You want to be around them.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's so genuine. They look at each other.
I'm sorry, they're right here. They're except actually, John Lithgow is playing King Lear tonight, and Alfred Molina is doing a TV show, and so they're very busy for men of a certain age, and it's inspiring.
It is inspiring, absolutely. I think that's an effect the movie has as well. Now I got off track. But you told an interesting story about a girl on a skateboard at the Q&A last night, which just blew my mind. I don't know if it's spoiling anything to talk about the shot.
No, there's a shot, an important shot towards the end of the film, and there's a young girl on a skateboard, and I don't know much about skating, so I had cast a 14-year-old girl who it turned out didn't know how to skate. So the day of production, the street is shut down, and it's our biggest day. It's a big scene, and I look over, and this girl can't skate, and I'm very concerned. And luckily I see out of the corner of my eye this ponytail go by, and I think it might be a girl on a skateboard. And so my producer went running after her, got into a van, followed her 3 blocks down the street into the PATH train subway in New York, arrived to her, tapped her on the shoulder and said, "You want to be in a movie?" And that girl is in the movie. And it's a great kind of turn of events, but it's pretty typical in an exaggerated way to what happens every day on a film set, which is you're always trying to take advantage of the opportunities that life gives you, and to try to not be so controlled, to be orderly and make sure that things are happening in a rate but not to be so controlled that you're missing what's going on around you. And that's a kind of Zen space or whatever it might be that I try to sit in when I'm making a movie.
A couple more things. First, your DP.
Yeah. And I have one thing I want to say on this site.
Oh, sure.
Well, we can. I just want to say that it's interesting because this is a site that focuses on independent films, and one of the hardest things that people I don't think see from the exterior is how difficult it is for any of us who are working in independent film to create a sustained career over time. You see films, 1, 2, 3 films maybe. You see a very few number of people who actually are making films over a 20 or 30 year period. And as someone who's an artist and a filmmaker who is interested in the independent voice, this film, though it has John Lithgow and Alfred Molina and Sony Classics is releasing it, it comes from a very independent place. Not a dollar came from Hollywood to make the movie. It was from 26 individuals who came together to decide they wanted to fund it. And it is my film as the filmmaker. And I think that is precious and something that I find is very important about the film. It's freedom.
Is that what independent film means to you, freedom?
I am returning to an attachment to independent film as not a marketing tool that describes how it's going to be used by the studios to talk about a kind of film that I don't relate to anymore. To me, independence is independence. And I look back to people like Orson Welles and John Cassavetes and Maya Deren and these filmmakers who found by any means necessary the means to make their own films from their own place and with their own voice. And I feel strongly that's a position I want to fight for and to hold on to.